Hi everybody, welcome to the week 26 of the Truth Academy about Homosexuality series. This is the best 200 plus clips of the previous 25 shows that Americans for Truth has kindly allowed us to show on public access Up North Media. Every middle school and secondary school student should watch this hour-long show to be inoculated from the adult homosexualists in the public schools attempting to indoctrinate kindergartners through 12th graders on the topic of homosexuality. And if you know of any secondary school students, please point them to this show. We will speak about the local TCAP's promotion of harmful homosexual behavior during the last 3 or 4 minutes of the show. And without further ado, here is the best of the Truth Academy about homosexuality.
Well, thank you all for coming, and welcome to the debut Truth Academy. So glad all of you are here. The Truth Academy, which is was originally oriented towards young people. We recognize that young people are much more pro-homosexual than older people these days. And so the Gay Liberation Network came out with the idea that we are teaching hate. So I'm here to formally announce that there will be no hate taught here today. And certainly defending morality, especially historic Judeo-Christian morality, is not hatred. Espousing Christian beliefs or traditional beliefs about sexual morality is not bigotry. I think there's a lot of inaction on this issue, that it's sort of cowardice that masquerades as theology, is the way I put it. In other words, people find all sorts of ways to not deal with the homosexuality issue, and yet here it is front and center in our culture. The homosexual activists are pushing, and while they are at the zenith of their power, we see the evangelical church searching, almost as it were, for ways to not deal with this issue. And yet, what is the rhetoric we hear from the Human Rights Campaign? Marriage equality. All these euphemisms. These shibboleths from the homosexual activist movement, which are very effective because the movement has been marketed. And so we find ourselves at the edge of tyranny. And the question is, will Americans wake up to that threat, or will we succumb to this just ubiquitous political correctness which seems to invade all aspects of our lives? And if we allow people to say they're Christian and promoting homosexuality, would we ever tolerate that for other sexual sins? Would we say that I'm a Christian and I embrace adultery? I think adultery should be mainstreamed in society. Would we say that about incest or pornography? We can never quit. We've got to be like Winston Churchill. We will never, never, never give in, because the truth is the truth. And politics doesn't change the truth.
And they said, well, yeah, we know we're supposed to look back like Bowers did to all that history. We think it's more important to look at recent history and look at the emerging trends that are taking place. And so they said Bowers got it wrong, looked at the wrong question, and anybody who's read anything from Judith Reisman will tell you the model penal code was that was trending back in when Bowers was decided in the 1980s. The model penal code was drafted early 80s, late 70s, based on Kinsey research, Alfred Kinsey's research. So based on Alfred Kinsey's research with regard to essentially using children as his subjects, so he's using the model penal code to show, well, we all knew sexual mores were changing, we misunderstood what sexual mores are about, this is just natural to express sexuality, apparently as young as 2 and 3 years old. So the model penal code should have alerted the court and Bowers that they were getting it wrong. And then the very obvious, all laws are based on someone's morals. So if you're going to say laws are unconstitutional because they're based primarily on morals, we cannot have a system of laws. And he points that out in his opinion. Civil unions in Vermont are everything but the name of marriage. Everything but the name of marriage. And so they got all those rights. That's 1999. So they're stripping away family and parentage, what it means, leaving the name of marriage right now, because they're losing a lot of those, but everything else is being given away. And that's the real battlefront today. The gender of a child's parent is not a factor in a child's adjustment. They're just as likely to be healthy, and research supporting this conclusion is accepted beyond question. Religious beliefs that gays and lesbian relationships are sinful or inferior to heterosexual relationships harms gays and lesbians. It's a finding of fact, and I have to remind myself, God's standards are unchanging, and we're called to fight and to preserve marriage, and also to educate the public on this issue about his standards. The results are not up to me. They're in his hands for him to use as he wishes. And I think we have to keep that in mind when we have a big loss like we did yesterday.
What motivates some of these leading activists, including the individual Bob Schwartz, who's leading the Gay Liberation Network contingent that's organized the protest, is a Marxist ideology. And you're not going to see anything in the media about this. I guess normally people don't think of the homosexual movement as being a communist or Marxist movement, but it is. I was struck by the famous book by John Barron, who used to write for Reader's Digest, about the nature of the KGB and how and who they exploit. And he had a section in there on how the KGB used to target homosexuals. And that gets us to the Manning case. He was a homosexual. He was an open homosexual who decided to strike back at the United States, at the U.S. military in particular, because he didn't like the way he was being treated as an out-of-the-closet homosexual. Harry Hay is considered, even by the homosexual activists, to be the founder of the modern gay rights movement. Here he is, later in life wearing a dress. He was a Marxist atheist who later in life started a group called the Radical Fairies. And these were men who would dress up as women in some cases and go out into the woods and pay homage to the earth. It was Harry Hay who came up with this idea that it's not just the workers who are oppressed under capitalism. It's these other groups, including the gays, the homosexuals. They're part of the oppressed masses.
Just think, if never judging truly were the ideal, then it would be immoral for us to judge even a person like Hitler's actions as wrong. So hopefully this next talk, The Born Gay Hoax, will help you to gather the information that you need to make your own judgment, a wise judgment, one that is, in fact, based on the truth of things. Prior to this, men and women who engaged in same-gender sexual acts were known as sodomites, pederasts, or Nebenschänder, literally boy ravishers. The third gender theory established a new concept for the masses, and this concept carried with it an entirely new blueprint for society's future. And it was by way of the Mattachine Society that the pro-sodomy movement grew to adulthood in America. Hay also believed that pederasty, man-boy sex, to be an essential part of the pro-sodomy movement in America, and openly endorsed the North American Man-Boy Love Association. The definition of a psychological disorder is, a thing is functioning in accord with its design but if something is inhibiting you from functioning in accord with your natural design, then you've got a disorder. The Born Gay Hoax was essentially invented in 1985 by Marshall Kirk and Dr. Hunter Madsen. These guys wrote this book after the ball, How America Will Conquer Its Fear and Hatred of the Gays in the 90s. If you go toward the back of the book, the entire thing is about how to attract younger males. That's what half the book is about. It's ridiculous. The other half is about how to brainwash Americans into believing that homosexuality is normal. And there was no enthusiasm for insinuating that they were born gay at first. But that all changed in 1986 when the pro-sodomy movement lost Bowers v. Hardwick, the United States Supreme Court case which upheld the rights of individual states to criminalize sodomy. The loss was devastating. In '86, so now they've confronted psychiatry, now they're confronting the law, next they're going to confront religion. Ulrichs invented the notion that people are born gay to repeal paragraph 175 of the German Penal Code, which criminalized sodomy. Kirk and Madsen invented the born gay hoax in order to repeal or overturn Bowers v. Hardwick and decriminalize sodomy in America. Quote, they must be cast as victims in need of protection so that straights will be inclined by reflex to assume the role of protector. So far, they write, gay Hollywood has provided our best covert weapon in the battle to desensitize the mainstream. The campaign should portray gays as superior pillars of society. Yes, yes, we know this trick is so old it creaks. It is absolutely appalling to hear the tactics promoted by Marshall Kirk and Hunter Madsen. Pro-sodomy activists who have employed these techniques have nothing to be proud of.
Anyway, let me go back, I guess, to the major part of my topic, which is, can people change? And the answer is yes, and I've been working in that arena for many, many years, because the truth of the matter is that people can change. Change is possible. That is the key to understand, because we are human beings. God has given us free will, and therefore we have the ability to change. Many think that nature and nurture play complex roles. This is an official APA statement. Sincerely motivated people who want to change can change. So now there's more than 100 other studies out there that are along the same line. The problem is that most people, and particularly people of faith, is a fear of being open, a fear of really speaking in a matter of true diversity or free speech. We really actually have viewpoint discrimination and outright manipulation. In the Lawrence versus Texas, there's a little footnote brief in the briefs signed by 31 or 32 gay activist organizations. And what they say there is, about 1% of women and 2% of men are homosexual. I have a private part that he has and she doesn't have. I guess he's my role model. This is all subconscious. So he starts looking over there and starts saying, gee, Dad, I want to be just like you. Now, if whatever the reason may be, Daddy's not there, Daddy's a workaholic, typical, by the way, particularly in this society today. If Daddy is a drunk, an alcoholic, it could be 1,000 things. Or the chemistry simply doesn't work. For whatever the reason is, the kid's personality and Daddy's personality don't mesh. So now all of a sudden, he doesn't start attaching to Daddy. Instead, he continues his attachment to Mommy. Because he's now attaching more to Mommy, he's going to start internalizing at that point certain more feminine characteristics of Mom and less masculine characteristics of Dad. This is a typical pattern. I got to tell you, when I talk to the strugglers, as we call them, depending upon the mood I'm in, sometimes I'll say to them, well, let me kind of describe what might be your family history, and you tell me where this applies. And the kid says, who told you? So what happens, though, is now this kid starts playing more with the girls than with the boys because he feels more comfortable with the girls. And he's now even more internalizing more feminine characteristics. As he's doing this, the other little boys start making fun of him. Now he starts getting peer wounds, same-sex peer wounding. That's, again, the term that we use, okay? Sexual abuse, which has been talked about by a couple of speakers, clearly is a major issue. Because what happens is that a kid who gets sexually abused, sometimes it really feels pretty good. It's like it gives him an erotic high. And he may also have detachment at that point from his father and says, oh, this is what masculine love is all about. Men who get sexually abused by men, depending upon whose figures you read, there's between 40% and 70% of male homosexuals were sexually abused at one point. The figures on female homosexuality being sexually abused, again, the numbers are higher than males, and again, depending upon whose numbers you believe, They run from anywhere like, I've seen the lowest is around 50 some odd percent. The highest I've ever seen, which I really don't believe, I think it's too high, is 90%. Today, one of the biggest factors is what I refer to as cultural abuse, cultural wounds. I mean, you have in nursery schools now, information being given out to children about homosexuality as a normal variant. The amount of information that is being fed into our kids is mind-boggling, totally mind-boggling. One of my rabbis once told me, he said that one of the real provisions of Leviticus 18:22, which talks about man shall not lie as an abomination kind of thing, which really means, by the way, according to the literature, that you've been led astray. One of my rabbis said that the real violation of Leviticus 18:22 is when the society accepts it as the norm. When society accepts it as the norm, that's really the violation of Leviticus 18:22. And guess what? We're there. And then it's a societal problem.
Okay, everybody, I'm Greg Quinlan. I am now president of PFOX. I'm here as I'm also an ex-gay man. I've been out of the homosexual lifestyle for going on 19 and a half years. And it has been a journey, and that's what we're going to talk about. So I'm going to give you my testimony. The other difference between my father and Archie Bunker is Archie Bunker wasn't physically violent. My father was to one of his kids, to me, the oldest of four, and he used to beat me up on a regular basis. Call me names, all kinds of things. We found his dad's Playboys and we started looking at them. And then a boy across the street, I was 10, he was 13, he introduced me to sex. And at that moment I got something I wasn't getting at home, I wasn't getting at school, and I wasn't getting in the church. I got affection, I got approval, and I got affirmation. Somebody was touching me without hitting me. Somebody was talking to me without screaming at me and calling me names. Somebody made me feel like they wanted to be around me. And besides it was sex, it felt good. So I went back for more. I call it a willing molestation. But I knew deep down it was wrong, but I didn't know why. I was suicidal, but because I had some fear of God, I decided it was better to come out of the closet than commit suicide, so I did. But that was about the time the AIDS epidemic hit. And when it was first hit, it wasn't called AIDS, it was called GRID, gay-related infectious disease or gay-related immune disease. I remember it as infectious disease. And then this guy I was dating took me to this fancy foo-foo reception of the Human Rights Campaign Fund, as it was called then, or HRC. And when I forgave my father, the same-sex attraction stopped. Now, you've already heard me say, in response to tell the truth in love, but it isn't love until you tell the truth. I want to show you
So when I say I'm against homosexuality, I mean I'm against a self-destructive lifestyle that is both unnecessary and dangerous. Now that's a tricky position when you have gay friends, like I do. But then he got real serious. You know what, zealot, he said, and he gestured toward the packed house inside. I've known some of those people in there for 15 years, but you know what? You're my only friend. Because you told me what I always knew. I always knew. And then he started sobbing. And I grabbed him and I hugged him. And he just cried into my shoulder. But what I do know is this. Scott heard the truth because someone was willing to tell him. Faithful are the wounds of a friend.
And when I forgave my father, the same-sex attraction stopped.
I teach at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, a professor of New Testament there with primary expertise in Pauline studies and sexuality issues in Scripture. And I'm going to start with the text in Genesis 1:26 to 28. And God said, "Let us make Adam," which is simply a Hebrew term for earthling, created from the ground, the Adamah, a human, in our image, in accordance with our likeness. And he writes, quote, "Human sexuality is of a wholly, commenting on this text, is of a wholly different order from that of the beast. Sexual perversion is viewed as a desecration of the divine image of man." In other words, what a man does sexually will impact the image of God stamped in his being. So, unlike animals, what humans do sexually could efface or enhance God's image. And right at the heart of that is the sexual differentiation between two primary sexual counterparts, male and female. You mess with that, and you mess with the image of God. A male shall not be made a man's sexual counterpart, because he's not. At every level of literary and historical context that you can approach, when you look at the Sodom text, it indicates that part of the indictment is the indictment of degrading the maleness of men in the city by treating them as if their maleness has no bearing on their identity. Okay?
We're going to talk about the battle over the blood supply in the context of the gays in the military debate. Now, she goes into, and this is where it gets graphic, a lot of the facts, the statistics, and these are official statistics, about what homosexuals do. Especially, we're talking about the gay males. Men who have sex with men are at high risk for contracting HIV, AIDS, and other STDs. Cruising, bathhouses, circuit parties, internet hookups, prostitution, pornography, tea room sex are all defended, openly defended by gay men as essential to their identity, to their sexual identity. Since men who have sex with men are 46 to 86 times more likely to be newly infected with HIV. And here's an incredible fact. We don't think about it. The VA today is the biggest single provider of HIV care in the nation. Think about that. The Veterans Administration. But we know the cost is $18,000 to $20,000 a year to take care of each soldier or each veteran. Our point is that we need to focus on protecting our soldiers. That should be our emphasis during this controversy over Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and that's where the blood supply comes in, because there is a real problem, if you look at the literature, of tainted blood on the battlefield. And I don't think I have to tell you about the serious nature of this disease. It really is just terrible. It's all about them. It's all about their rights. Their rights.
We can't compromise on this. There's no ground for neutrality. There's no foreground for compromise. And that's really what I'm going to focus on here today. A few key terms. They seem like obvious ones: winner, loser, and let me get here. Neutrality, compromise, and I'm going to make pretty clear using some quotes from the homosexual activists themselves that there's a winner, there's a loser, and they plan on being the winners. And they themselves indicate there's no room for compromise and there's no such thing as neutrality. These are the choices that you have. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal man and birds and animals and reptiles. Again, setting apart the two choices. In Isaiah 5:20, woe to those who call evil good and good evil. And is that not where we're at today? And woe to those who call evil good and good evil. It talks about Christians who compromise. I'm going to compromise and be willing to say, let's pass civil unions, it's okay. Let's pass domestic partnerships, it's okay. You are calling that which God has said is evil, is sinful, good, by helping to put that in place or letting it happen. But the point is, we want to go to court, sue, and silence you. Either go and do what we say, or you're out of business, or you're going to be fined or lose your license. But again, it's easy target. When you put sexual orientation as a protected class, anybody who's homosexual now has something to grab onto. PFOX, y'all, Greg talked about that last night in his organization, but they had a situation where their flyers, which are sitting on the back, available for you to take for free, and I recommend that you do, they try to get these into the schools. And what's their message? You know, all that indoctrination you're getting in the school, that you're born that way and can't change. We want you to know the truth, at least an alternative message. Okay, this is the goal with the literature. To conclude, first of all, we lack. I got that. If you get any message, not only shouldn't we compromise, we lack the authority from God to compromise. God doesn't call on us to compromise on His standard. You have to remember that our God is the God of impossibilities. So when we think of, I don't think this is possible, I don't think that's pragmatic, I don't think we can get that vote or get the votes, God delights in doing exactly what we as humans think we can't accomplish. And so our duty to Him is to do that which we know is right and leave the outcome to Him. Speak with direct language and not evasive euphemisms, okay? They ask you a question. The guy asked him, you think I'm going to hell? Think of all the ways you'd like to squirm out of that answer, but no, you've got to tell the truth. Stay on the offensive. That's the other thing, and that's where we got to strategize. We can't just always be putting out fires. We got to bring our own fires. And so we got to find ways to go on the offensive to take back what is God.
The more you understand what is going on in the public school systems, the more terrified that we all get. And we need to get the message out of what is in the school systems, because unfortunately 98% of the people don't have a clue what their kids are being taught. Do not have a clue. And if they knew what the schools were teaching, we might have a chance. We might. Because the theory is, of those who are trying to give the propaganda mythology out there, is that sexuality is committed firmly at age 3. That's the theory they come up with. And my patients always remind me that what is most important to them is their identity. So here we are, back in the world of identity politics. The best evidence, however, of the ludicrousness, the experimental nature of this, comes from Johns Hopkins University. I should tell you that because of these findings, Johns Hopkins University actually closed, one of the most prestigious universities in the country, actually closed their SRS center. Anyway, let me give you some of the summary from the McHugh-Meyer study at Johns Hopkins. With these facts in hand, I concluded that Hopkins was fundamentally cooperating with a mental illness. And again, it's still in the DSM, so it can be called a mental illness. We psychiatrists, I thought, he continues, I love this line, would do better to concentrate on trying to fix their minds rather than their genitalia. The children transformed from their male constitution to female roles suffered prolonged distress and misery as they sensed their natural attitudes, the DNA that was really in them. The parents, he said, usually live with guilt over their decisions, often second-guessing themselves and somewhat ashamed of the fabrication. We have wasted scientific and technical resources and have damaged our professional credibility by collaborating with madness. I like that line, by collaborating with madness, rather than trying to study, cure, and ultimately prevent it. The answer to your question is yes, in my opinion. The psychiatrists, the psychologists, the social workers have bought into this mythology, the propaganda mythology, over and over and over again.
Some of these are anything but safe, as we well know. So often, these programs have become vehicles for aggressive homosexual activism, and they become indoctrination vehicles for the idea of homosexuality, and for homosexuality to be forced, and gender confusion to be forced onto kids in schools. And that's just the way it goes. This is supposedly going to make kids more safe. Now, how is that mental gymnastic accomplished? The Day of Silence, for those of you who don't know, is a pro-homosexual observance organized and promoted by the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network, GLSEN. It's supposedly student-led and run, but it was really devised and has been organized nationally by this adult homosexual activist group. You don't have to approve of homosexuality to prevent bullying. It's that simple. There's tons of people who oppose homosexuality who also oppose bullying. And that's been the way it's been since time began. And here's the basics of these bills. That safety, the new definition of safety, is freedom from hearing any criticism of or warnings about homosexuality. That's safety. They've made kids believe that it's a just cause for two homosexual males to be having sex with each other. This is noble and worthy of defense. Anyone who happens to point out the straight upward trend of HIV rates, as reported by the Centers for Disease Control among 13 to 24-year-old males, is full of hate. Because no one is born homosexual. No one. Let me repeat that again. No one is born homosexual. Queer theory is, continual change of sexuality on all sides, in all directions, at all times, and rethinking your gender, and whatever you want to be, and you make up your own names. Well, if it was a fixed identity, you wouldn't be doing that now, would you? Sex was never meant to be a furtive bathroom proposition by a 13-year-old with an unknown, repulsive male adult. So we're not here tonight to talk about the gay agenda so much as we're talking about a war. This is a war. It's psychological terrorism, it's spiritual terrorism. Every war needs warriors. And I'm here tonight to ask for some more warriors. When I finally opened my narrow, rigid, little liberal mind and got more information, not less, I changed my mind about this. And when I started looking at what was happening in the schools, and 17 years ago, it was a piece of cake compared to today, I got really mad. And I decided I was going to do something. It began to occur to me this was child manipulation and child abuse. Ad hominem attacks means you've lost the argument. You don't have an argument. Tolerance is highly narrow and intolerant. It just doesn't get any better than this for homosexual activists, for the deconstruction of Western civilization. My heart as a Christian, as a mother, as an American, as a fan of true and not phony justice, makes me ask the following questions. Why are elementary school kids the targets of homosexual activism? The collaborators in the media are, I think, often homosexual men and feminists who hate men anyway. They're okay with, let's do away, especially with boys, let's change their gender, let's feminize them. I ask the question, why do the courts in Massachusetts ignore the parental rights of parent David Parker? All he wanted to do was to be notified when pro-homosexual lessons were being taught to his son, kindergarten-age son. That wasn't allowed. That was such a huge threat. The gay agenda is blatantly anti-Christian, almost always now, making no apologies for it. Homosexuality is not a viewpoint. It is a high-risk and deviant sexual behavior. How do they get away with this? Because they have weenie lawyers getting away with this. Why are we letting them? Because school boards won't stand up. The ACLU comes in and they go, well, gosh, what do we do? You stand up for your boys is what you do, and your girls. You don't do this. We need people to adopt schools. Your local school, your grandchildren's school, your child's school, and monitor what they're doing and try to get the homosexual indoctrination out. This is a huge task.
Qumran rejected polygamy on these grounds. Taking two wives in their lives is wrong because the foundation of creation is male and female. He created them, citing the 1/3 of the text of Genesis 1:27 that Jesus himself cited. What's in common between Genesis 1:27 and 2:24? It's really male and female, man and woman. That these constitute the two and only two persons that can unite in a marital bond. So in effect, Jesus is saying, that analogy, Jesus is basically speaking to our culture. The common analogy that's now made between the prohibitions of homosexual practice and the food laws? Jesus said, don't make them. Sex is not like food. I mean, if the Titanic is going down, what is the godly thing to do? Get people on the lifeboats. And if there's somebody who's, you know, playing a nice little tune on the Titanic and thinking everything is fine, you've got to wake that person up. The reality of what actually is happening. Otherwise, even though you say you're acting in love, functionally you're acting in hate. If love is uninformed by truth, you could find yourself in a position where you're functionally acting in hate.
Now, Kinsey got these statistics by cooking the books, and Dr. Judith Riesman and Edward Eichel wrote a book called Kinsey, Sex, and Fraud in 1990 that just laid out all the flaws in the Kinsey studies. Kinsey was a promiscuous homosexual. He had had sex with every member of his staff, male members of his staff. He required staff members to, the ones that were married, to have sex with their wives on film. He took, in the attic of his house, or his garage, I guess, C.W. Tripp was a photographer and a filmmaker, and they filmed people having sex, and there was a lot of pressure on the Kinsey staff to go ahead and experiment sexually with other people outside their marriages. So what he did was cook up the Kinsey studies basically to provide the scientific validation for his own sexual impulses. He wanted to change America's and the world's view of sexual morality in order to validate his own bizarre lifestyle. But the model penal code was changed to incorporate the Kinsey findings. Eventually, it was used to to usher in no-fault divorce, and to take the abortion laws off the books, and to finally take the sodomy laws off the books, all based on junk science. The junk science and the intimidation were what carried the day when they made the change. The homosexual activists threatened violence at the annual convention. And they called up psychiatrists, threatened them. They took over the nomenclature committee that defined psychiatric terms. Now, one of the problems here is that the media, that made Alfred Kinsey such a rock star, is still covering up all the junk science, and it's all junk, from the genetic studies, and I did a paper for CWA called Born or Bred. I got the actual studies, looked at them, they're junk science. They methodologically, they're a joke.
But this has been a big triumph in this area. I'll just share this now. When we can educate the courts and get them to understand that the right standard is rational basis under this test, not strict scrutiny, it's not a protected class, it's not like race, it's not national origin. Every time we've convinced, not every time, all but 3 times, we've been able to convince a court that the proper standard is rational basis, we win. So the triumph is we learned about this, we educate the courts, we win. The other challenge is all along reminding ourselves that we want to litigate these cases and still portray a message of God's love and hope for those who are involved in same-sex relationships. For me, I continue to view this litigation as a ministry opportunity. If I ever saw my heart was changing to anything other than I want to convey truth in love to individuals who are struggling with same-sex attractions, I told myself I need to get out of this. First of all, a key component of our litigation is that protected class, and I've gone over the 3 factors, and so you've got your political powerlessness, severe discrimination, and immutable characteristic. I'm going to now, it's become the poster child, just tell you that the California Prop 8 litigation in federal court is the poster child for how not to litigate a marriage case. If the Supreme Court were to rule to affirm this decision, it will do just what Roe did. With one fell swoop, all marriage laws defining marriage as one man and one woman will be deemed unconstitutional across the nation. So the impact of what just took place in California cannot be overstated.
I wanted to discuss before I actually get started, and the actual title of this is called The Big Pink Plan to Make a Lavender Culture, and it's based on my experience of having been a volunteer with the Human Rights Campaign Fund, as it was called then. They said, who could say anything about human rights? Who's against human rights? So they use the term, the Human Rights Campaign. How about that? Well, how innocuous, how inclusive, what an umbrella, what a lie. I had an abusive father. He was Archie Bunker. My dad was physically violent to one of his kids, to me. I'm the oldest of 4, and he used to beat me up on a regular basis. Now, my father, by the way, came to faith on his deathbed. And before he died, he told the man who told me he hated me told me he loved me. So by God's grace, he can turn things around. The Human Rights Campaign, most of you know the logo. You've seen it, the big, deep blue square with a bright yellow equal sign in the middle of it. That they say that it's all about equality. That is a lie, and I'm going to prove it here today. That is an outright lie. There's nothing about equality with the Human Rights Campaign, nor is it about anything about the homosexual movement. It's not about equality. It's about dominance. Bullying curriculums. We have a brochure back there about bullying. Through the bullying curriculums, they are teaching kids to be tolerant about homosexuality because they can't help it. You're born that way. With no science to back that up, they make these blanket statements, sweeping generalizations about that, and they use the bullying curriculum to do that.
Question, say, what do you suggest as the best ways to turn this issue around for the conservative pro-family movement?
So we have capitulated to the dictates of political correctness in our use of language. We need to redefine the terms, we need to define the playing field, and we need to do it aggressively, always in love, keeping in mind that always in love, and always with the love of Christ, but Christ was always spoke truth, unapologetically, and without giving ground.
The argument that tell the truth in love, and I hear that all the time, and I'm tired of it. I'm sick of it. Tell the truth in love, but ladies and gentlemen, it isn't love until you tell the truth. That's right. And it's time we told the truth.
Tactical decisions, it's called, and it was called that in California, to decide that we really don't want to talk about sexual orientation. We don't want to debate whether it's immutable if you're born that way. We don't want to talk about all the health risks that Arthur just talked about. We're going to put no evidence on in that case in California because it's a tactical decision. Instead, we're just going to argue a little bit, well, marriage is good and it's always been that way. And then when you get a decision like we did yesterday from the judge who says that there is no evidence, well, there was no evidence because legal counsel chose not to put on any evidence on that issue and approach the real topic.
But at least I can say to my children, but they know that I did everything that I could. You know, if the schools are worse, which they will be unless something happens, I did what I could. It says be angry but sin not. It doesn't say don't be angry.
Abraham Lincoln said this: the philosophy in the classroom for one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next. Look what we got.
Yeah, I definitely think that it's important that we anchor the debates somewhere around this whole born gay thing, because it's a debate that we're definitely going to win. And not only that, but if they're not born that way, then it opens up the psychological discussion again.
Now, there is an odd alliance with the Muslims and the homosexual activists, especially in Canada, our neighbor to the north. They've concocted human rights commissions. They've managed to get a hate crimes law on the books. And it's kind of odd because if the Muslims ever get the upper hand, the gays are going to be toast. But anyway, Cloud makes the case that the Democratic Party is a fully owned subsidiary of a group of homosexual billionaires. You got to follow the money. Of course, the media are the reason homosexual activists, I believe, are as powerful as they've been. Because if they're less than 2% of the population, and they don't have theology, biology, science, sociology, common sense, history, all major religions going for them, what have they got going for them? Well, when you think of the big gay bully, he's not really that big at all. He's a little guy with a big media bully with a baseball bat behind him, ready to bash anybody who steps out and says, this stuff's wrong, and it hurts people. When I debate this and I get the usual, boy, you hate these people, I use this analogy. I say, look, Christians are like the people standing on the top of a 10-story building, and they see some guy running toward the edge because somebody told him it'd be a real thrill to go off the edge. And the Christians are there saying, don't do this. God created you. Your life is worth something. We love you. Stop. And you've got the liberal over there saying, nonsense. He's being himself. He's expressing himself. Get out of the way. Now, who do you think's being more compassionate?
Who here has never felt anger, jealousy, envy, pride, covetousness? Nobody. Anyone want to extol those things as virtues? No, the fact that they're innate doesn't make them moral. And that's why Christianity has this image of the necessity of taking up one's cross, being crucified with Christ, and denying oneself and losing one's life. Because it doesn't matter what your biological urges are. God is interested in remaking you in the image of Jesus Christ by any means necessary. What's this all about? About the meaning of change in God's kingdom. It doesn't matter whether anyone loses same-sex attractions or not. They're still bound to obey God's commands. Change is total. It's taking up one's cross, losing one's life, and denying oneself. It's death to an old humanity and the creation of a new humanity in Christ. That's expected of every believer, no pass, no exemption for anything. The question is here really whether God's ethics trump our deep-seated impulses, or whether God's ethics have to be refashioned in accord with our impulses. Who's God, in other words, here, right? We or God? Slavery is an enslavement to impulses, and that's what those who are promoting homosexual practice are trying to do in the church. Enslave people to their impulses.
The problem ultimately here, and I think around the world, is in the churches. You know, we thought when we decided to decriminalize homosexuality that that would satisfy them, that they would be happy with that. But they have evolved, they have morphed into this powerful gay rights movement, this lobby that Johnson, a Catholic Christian, a conservative, calls the monster in our midst. Conservatism has never, in any sense, incorporated the tenets or beliefs or practices of homosexuality. George Soros is not only involved here in the United States, and he's worth probably $10 billion with a beep, $10 billion. He's involved abroad. And he's been funding these pro-homosexual efforts in other foreign countries, including Uganda. Now, libertarianism is not conservatism. It's just not. When looking at the conservative movement, Ayn Rand was not a conservative. Now, she has been called a libertarian, but the fact is that she was a materialist. She was basically a humanist, and she was pro-abortion. She had no conservative views that I know of on the cultural or social issues. This is the key figure at the Cato Institute who runs a lot of this nonsense, David Bose. He's executive vice president of the Cato Institute. He's openly homosexual, openly. He's also a big enthusiast and supporter of marijuana. Thinks it's great.
And to explain from God's perspective, this is not simply just another sin. This is really the sin of the end times. This is the issue that God has put forward, and I'll show how the warning signs are really laid for that. In Genesis 1:27, in which we are told that we are made, we human beings are made in the image of God, male and female, that we represent the two halves of one whole. And when we see the way that things have happened today, you can present marriage, God's standard of marriage, as the solution to the problems that we have around us. And so I think what God is showing by example here is that the times of Noah was a time in which we're becoming very much like, a time of apostasy in which sexual perversion had gone to an extreme. And I think that the exclamation point on that idea is what's presented in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. But it says, they parade their sin like Sodom. And that is what is exactly going on with people who have defined themselves by this particular behavior and lifestyle. They parade their sin like Sodom. And they do it under the rainbow banner almost as if they're saying, God, you can do nothing to us. So you have in a series of examples here, you have wherever homosexuality is mentioned in the Scripture, it's mentioned in connection with social calamity, with personal and social destruction and destructiveness. But if you look at the Scripture, homosexuality was condemned before the Mosaic Law. It was condemned in the Mosaic Law, And the condemnation of it was affirmed in the New Testament as well.
These are the guys that are the Go Proud, the Cato Institute Republicans. They're these Ramon Bueller, South Park Republican, pro-gay, pro-baby murder, pro-global warming Republicans. Half of them are socialists posing as conservatives. They like to make examples out of people so that if anybody else thinks about, being the nail that sticks up, they're going to get hammered down. But this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with people that have been hurt, people that have, disorders, people that are in denial, and their friends are in the closet of co-denial with them. They're in denial from the fact that they aren't born this way, that they do have the ability to change. But, like Ellen DeGeneres, her stepdad attempted to molest her multiple times. Prior to that, she was attracted to men. Her mom's autobiography notes that she was attracted to men. Same thing with this notion that homosexuals are 100% biologically determined, that they're meat puppets, again, dangling from the strings of, chemical reactions in their brains. One of the number one methods by which the young person gets shut down in debate is by some obscure study somebody cites that proves people are born gay and they're 100% biologically determined robots. So that's number one. The number two method by which they get in trouble when they debate these people is they say, why can't they just love each other? Why can't two people love each other? Why are you so against that? But we mean something else when we say that a thing is natural. We say that it's fitting its pre-technological pattern, purpose, or design. But the male sex organ wasn't designed for the male waste organ. So homosexuality is not natural by that definition either. From the natural law perspective, emotions are fluid. They can be conditioned to feel this way or that about any subject, but reason is fixed.
So I want to take our attention away from the trees for a moment, and let's look at the forest. I think that throughout the conference a theme has emerged, and I would say that the theme of the inaugural Americans for Truth Academy is truth and love. I hope that everybody would agree. Consider 1 Corinthians, I believe it's 13:6. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with truth. So keep in mind that this is a defensive stance that we're taking. People say, you hate gays, you're gay bashing, you're obsessed with homosexuality. We are in a defensive posture. We are defending history. We are defending a position that every major world religion, thousands of years of history, and as you've heard throughout, uncompromising human biology take, which is that homosexual behavior is immoral and it is destructive. This is the Judeo-Christian tradition upon which our nation was founded, as to appease leftists' euphemistic demands for tolerance and diversity. This is putting the interests of a political ideology, a worldview, above national security, above what is in the best interest of our troops. And these are the people that fight for our liberty. Certainly, with the commanders, all four commanders of the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine, absent General Mullen, who they have all come out against this. They can't believe they're pushing forward with it. The left has no trouble putting ideology above the safety of their fellow citizens, I can tell you that now. And we see that evidenced by the call to lift the ban on homosexual blood in our blood banks, potentially contaminating the blood supply.
I think you're right. I think we need to somehow break through and get around that mentality that this is something that's left to somebody else, because these are the men who have the power of the Word of God, which is the best motivator of all, to stir up people's hearts with truth. There's also cowardice masquerading as theology. Yep. People finding reasons why they can't get involved, and instead of defending why they're letting the culture be handed over to the barbarians.
The men in our churches need to protect our children. And when you're not paying attention to those kids, believe me, the homosexual activists will be happy to do that.
And then they get on the internet, they get into gay pornography, they feel something, and they think, I'm gay. That's what's happening. Pornography is the fuel behind all of this. And nobody's there to tell them that in an eroticized situation you're going to feel something. It's manipulative. Get away from it. Just go on and do your thing. You're fine.
You know what I find fascinating is the enfeebled church pulls back from preaching morality, while the gay movement in the last 5 to 10 years has adopted morality language to preach at society. And so now they say, after the Prop 8 decision you saw on the TV set that said shame on Prop 8, and they're preaching shame, they're preaching morality, they're rewriting the Bible. They win when we talk about orientation and rights and equality. We win when we talk about changeable behavior that's immoral, destructive, and can be overcome.
There are people out there going, oh, I have gay friends. I'm so sick of hearing that. How many of you are sick of hearing that? I don't care. I mean, I have adulterer friends too, and I don't parade that around.
But in the back of my mind, I always wonder, had this older fella, had he not brought me into the situation, perhaps my life would have been different.
It's not an identity. No one's born this way. No scientific data. None whatsoever. You come and show me. I'll eat it.
I became Tim. I became the aggressor, and I became the one that was using other people to satisfy myself.
It's been reported that 30% of 20-year-old homosexual men will either have HIV or be dead of AIDS by the time they're age 30.
You know, you're desired, you're wanted when you're in your teens, maybe when you're in your 20s. When you're in your 30s, you know, you're the pursuer. You're looking for somebody else, usually younger, maybe. And when you're in your 40s, you're out of it. Nobody wants you.
So same-sex attractions are always driven by pain. All of it. So it's not an identity, it's a behavior. First it's a thought, feeling, desire, and then if acted upon, becomes a behavior. So no one's born this way. And now it's a sellout because they couldn't find out what it was about. Now they're saying, well, embrace it. If it ain't broke, we don't have to fix it. That's cheap. It's cheap science, it's cheap religion, and it's cheap education. We owe our children the right to the truth about same-sex attractions.
Hi everybody again. I'm Bill Wiesner, founder of tcfamily.org, where you can watch this powerful 26-part series 24/7. We hope to put all 26 shows online so anyone can watch any of them at any time once we raise the sufficient funds to do so. I'm going to speak here in closing in like 3 minutes on 4 topics: recruiting, avoiding, promoting, and the 3 stages of truth. In recruiting, we've seen in earlier shows how the 6-member panel at the NMC Gay and Lesbian Forum were recruiting allies. That's their tactic, to get people who know gays to come out as their allies. I know they're well-meaning, but actually I would say they're more like enablers, enabling harmful behavior. These folks will die on the average of 8 to 20 years earlier. They produce, it's 44 times more likely to get AIDS for a homosexual man than for a heterosexual. And this is what's being passed on to the kindergartners through 12th graders. So I know they're well-intentioned, but the true allies would be the ones to discourage this harmful behavior. Secondly, going on to avoiding, we were at the 2 National Cherry Festival parades. And over the past 3 months or more, we've gone to the Record Eagle, we've gone to the Northern Express and asked them for an interview. This is the largest series on homosexuality in the country, but they won't touch it. And more recently at the parade, I asked one reporter from Interlochen Public Radio, and even though I had my 4x8 foot sign there, and this is a very controversial topic, he didn't even have time to take the handout on preventing bullying in your schools. And also, the HRC is avoiding a complaint we made where a man attacked my sign, and then he said, if you touch me, it's a hate crime. In promoting, they've got 2 methods in TCAPS right now that are strongly promoting this. I don't have time to go into it, but one is be yourself always, everywhere. It's using a little 2-year-old girl to promote this whole issue, and we just don't have time to go into it, but I've got all the documents and how they use it to manipulate the mind, to change minds. And also the Building Bridges with Music program, Jeff Haas's program. He's linked to Lady Gaga. She's a lesbian. 6 of the 7 testimonies on our site were by homosexuals, etc., etc. In closing, I'd like to say the 4 stages of truth, 3 stages of truth are that they go through. First, it is ridiculed. Secondly, it is violently opposed. And third, it is accepted as being self-evident. We hope that it will be accepted as being self-evident. If you'd like to help in this effort, please contact us at info@tcfamily.org. And thanks for watching.